Some men talk about honor, others live by it. I never cared for words. But when I saw the truth staring me in the face, I knew there was only one way this would end. My name is Jeremiah Vance. I'm 48 years old. I used to run into burning buildings for a living. Now I fix things, pipes, fences, busted walls, whatever needs doing. I don't talk much, don't waste breath on things that don't matter. People in Ashford, Montana, know me well enough. They nod when they pass, ask if I can look at their generator or patch up a leaky roof. I keep busy. Keeps my head straight. Kelly used to say she liked that about me. She said I was solid, a man who didn't break. I guess after 25 years, solid started to feel like something else to her. A burden maybe. A weight she wanted to shake off. I don't know when exactly she started pulling away, but when I noticed, it was already too late. It was the little things at first. A perfume I hadn't smelled on her before. Late nights at book club, when she'd come home with her hair too perfect for a woman who'd been reading with friends. The way she laughed too hard at her phone, then flipped it over when I walked by. I let it sit for a while. Gave her space. Figured maybe she was restless. Happens to people. Hell, it happened to me a few times. But I stayed. That was the difference. The night it hit me like a gut punch. I had just gotten in from fixing old Mrs. Tanner's porch steps. I kicked off my boots, stretched out on the couch. The house was quiet, too quiet. I glanced toward the kitchen. The dishes were still in the sink, untouched since breakfast. That wasn't like her. I called out. No answer. The clock read 11:30. I sat up. My eyes landed on her purse, half open on the counter. A small, velvet jewelry box stuck out, the kind you get from places that know how to mark up a price. I wasn't the one who bought it. I didn't touch it, just stared for a long moment, then stood and walked to the fridge. Cracked open a beer. Drank half of it while I leaned against the counter. My gut already knew. I didn't need to open the damn thing. I just needed to decide what I was going to do about it. She came in at midnight, heels clicking against the floor. She stopped short when she saw me, her hand tightening around her purse. You're still up? I took another sip of my beer, set it down slow. Guess so. She stood there a second too long. Looked like she wanted to say something, but changed her mind. I could see it all over her face. She was testing the air, trying to figure out if I knew anything. I'm gonna head up, she finally said. I nodded once. Let her go. In the morning, I made a call to Harvey Jacobs, the closest thing to an IT guy in town. Lanky, always in a hoodie, talked like everything bored him. The kind of guy who'd rather be arguing about operating systems than dealing with people's problems. He owed me a favor. I need you to check something, I said when he picked up. Harvey groaned. Jesus, Jeremiah, it's 7:30. You know normal people don't start causing problems this early. Not a problem, I said. Just a request. Silence on the other end. Then a sigh. All right, what kind of shady cybercrime are we committing today? Nothing illegal, I said. Just need some information. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in his cluttered shop, watching him type too fast while chewing on a protein bar like it personally offended him. I slid him Kelly's phone number. He didn't ask questions. Just got to work. Here we go, he muttered, scrolling through lines of data. She's been texting one guy a lot. Logan Allen. Know him? Logan Allen. The name landed like a dull thud in my chest. I knew him all right. Ran Allen's Taproom, the only real bar in town. Always had a grin too wide, a handshake too eager. The kind of guy who called everyone buddy, but never meant it. Harvey turned his screen toward me. They're careful. No explicit messages. But she's been meeting him late at night. Restaurants. The bar after hours. He clicked another tab. Here's the kicker. Bank transactions. Looks like she helped him with something. Money moving in and out of accounts that don't quite add up. I stared at the numbers, my jaw tightening. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else. Something messier. Harvey stretched. So what's next? You want me to? No, I said, standing up. That's enough. He raised an eyebrow. You're taking this well. I didn't answer. Just walked to the door. I had what I needed. Now it was just a matter of when and how I was going to use it. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I took a drive out to the lake. Middle of nowhere, no street lights, just the hum of the truck engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. I needed time to think. There was no rage, no shouting inside me. Just a cold certainty. She had made her choice. Now it was my turn. The wind kicked up off the water as I stood by the shoreline. The air smelled sharp, like pine and damp earth. I ran a hand over my jaw, feeling the rough stubble. Logan Allen. Of all people. He was a clown, a man who survived off charm alone, floating from one good time to the next. Not the type to take responsibility, not the type to think things through. And Kelly, she was a woman who thought everything through, which meant this wasn't an accident. I got back in the truck, rolled my shoulders, and turned the key. I had work to do. When I got home, Kelly was already gone. Left early, probably to meet him. I didn't check. Didn't need to. Instead, I walked through the house, taking stock. It was all in the details. The perfume on the dresser. The extra time she spent in the mirror. The car keys that had a second keychain I didn't recognize. I took a slow breath. I opened her closet, shifted a few things around, then took the jewelry box from the counter and set it neatly on top of her folded sweaters. Then I walked into the kitchen and placed Logan's cologne bottle, stolen from the bar's bathroom the week before, right next to her coffee cup. A little reminder. A little nudge. By noon, I was at Alan's taproom, sitting at the bar with a cup of black coffee. Logan spotted me from across the room, gave me that wide grin. Jeremiah Vance, look at you, man. Still too serious for your own good. I let him talk. Watched him pour himself a drink even though it was barely past midday. He was loose, relaxed, like he had nothing to hide. That was the thing about men like him. They only felt guilt if they got caught. I leaned back in my seat, tapping my fingers lightly against the wood. Heard business is good, I said. Logan took a sip of whiskey, shrugged. Can't complain. People like to drink. You know how it is. Yeah. Seems like they like to do a lot of things. Something flickered in his eyes, but he covered it fast. That's so. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Let the silence stretch. He was waiting for me to say more, but I didn't. That was the thing about silence. It made people nervous. Logan gave a little chuckle, too forced. Man, you've always been intense. You should lighten up. I just watched him. Said nothing. After a few seconds, he glanced at his watch, like he suddenly had somewhere else to be. Anyway, good seeing you, buddy. I smiled then. Not a real one. Just enough to let him know I wasn't fooled. Yeah, you too. That evening, Kelly was quiet. Too quiet. She moved around the house like she was listening for something, checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. When she walked past the counter, she froze for a second. Eyes flicked to the cologne bottle, then away just as fast. Her hand twitched like she wanted to move it, but she didn't. Later, when she went upstairs, I heard her closet door open. Then it was quiet again. She didn't come down for dinner. The next morning, I checked the trash. The cologne bottle was gone, buried under some paper towels. The jewelry box was right where I left it. She hadn't thrown that away. Good. She was thinking now. I went about my day like nothing was wrong. Fixed a fence for Old Man Reeves, helped Brianna Anderson load a shipment at the animal shelter. Just another day, another round of people assuming I was the same man I'd always been. When I got home, Kelly was already there, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked up when I walked in, her face carefully neutral. Hey, she said. I nodded. Set my keys down. Poured myself a drink. Waited. She tapped her fingers lightly against the ceramic, her nails clicking. Logan's bar got audited today. I took a sip of my whiskey. That's so? She exhaled through her nose. Yeah. Weird timing. I leaned against the counter, watching her. Seems like these things happen when you don't keep clean books. Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp now. She held my gaze a second longer than normal. Then she pushed back her chair and stood. I'm going to bed. I didn't stop her. Instead, I walked over to the sink, washed my glass, and dried it slow. I could feel the tension thick in the air, the weight of something shifting, something unraveling. And I wasn't done yet. Kelly wasn't sleeping well. I could tell by the way she moved around the house, slow and careful, like every step might set something off. She was trying to act normal, but it wasn't working. Her shoulders were too stiff, her smiles too forced. At night, I'd hear her shifting in bed, wide awake. She thought she was in control, thought she had me fooled. But she was unraveling, bit by bit. I gave her more to think about. I left a note on the fridge in her handwriting, copied from an old grocery list. Just a single line. Meet at the usual place. Be careful. Then I walked away, left it there like an afterthought. When I got back that evening, it was gone. She hadn't said a word about it. The next day, I stopped by Alan's taproom. Just long enough to make sure Logan saw me. I didn't say much, just ordered a coffee, let my eyes linger on him a little longer than normal. Watched him pretend not to notice. He was getting jumpy. Good. He should be. By the end of the week, the cracks were showing. Kelly was snapping at small things. A forgotten call, a misplaced set of keys. She was distracted, looking over her shoulder. Logan wasn't doing much better. Word around town was that he'd been drinking heavier than usual, that his accounts weren't adding up. A bar like his ran on reputation, and when people stopped trusting you, the money dried up fast. That was the thing about men like Logan. They didn't build anything worth keeping. They just rode the wave until it crashed. On Friday, I got a call from Harvey. "You're gonna like this," he said, his voice lazy but amused. "Your boy Logan? He's been trying to move some money around. Problem is, the IRS already has eyes on him. Looks like somebody tipped him off." I smirked. "That's so?" "Uh-huh. He's got meetings lined up with lawyers next week. Real bad timing for him, huh?" "Real bad." I let the silence hang between us for a second. "Appreciate the update." "No problem. This is way more entertaining than my usual gigs. Keep me posted if you need anything else." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. Things were falling into place. That night, I got home late. Kelly was in the living room, nursing a glass of wine, staring at nothing. She didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't say a word. I poured myself a whiskey and sat across from her. She finally spoke, her voice too controlled. "You've been busy." I swirled the glass in my hand, took a slow sip. "Always am." Her jaw tightened. She stared at the dark red liquid in her glass. "Logan's been a mess. Says someone's trying to ruin him. Sounds like his own problems are catching up to him." She looked at me then, searching. I held her gaze, calm and steady. She wanted me to crack, to say something, to admit I knew. But I wasn't going to give her that. Let her figure it out. Let her drive herself crazy with the doubt. She took a slow breath. "Are you happy?" she asked. I set my glass down carefully. "You tell me." A long silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She looked down first. I stood, stretched out my shoulders. "I'm gonna turn in. You coming?" She didn't answer. Just took another sip of wine, slower this time. As I walked upstairs, I could feel her eyes on my back. Let her wonder. Let her sit with it. We weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. I woke up before dawn. Same as always. Habit from the job, back when I still ran toward the fire instead of away from it. Stepping downstairs, I found the house quiet, but I wasn't alone. Kelly was on the couch, still in the clothes from last night, empty wine glass on the table beside her. She must have stayed up thinking, turning everything over in her head, trying to put the pieces together. Good. She stirred when she heard me moving around in the kitchen. "You're up early," she muttered, voice scratchy from sleep or too much wine. "Always am." I poured myself a coffee, took my time with it. She sat up, rubbing her temples. "Logan wants to leave town," she said, glancing over at me. "Says things are getting too complicated." I took a sip, let the warmth settle before I spoke. "Sounds like a good idea." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "You think so?" I shrugged. Never liked the guy much. Always seemed like the type to run when things got tough. She held my gaze, waiting for something. An accusation, a confrontation, anything. I didn't give it to her. Instead, I grabbed my jacket, finished my coffee, and walked out the door. By noon, I was standing outside Alan's taproom. The place looked like it had been hit by a storm. Chairs were overturned inside, paperwork scattered behind the bar. Logan wasn't handling things well. When I stepped in, he was hunched over a stack of papers, rubbing his temples like they might split open. He looked up, his face pale, like he hadn't slept in days. "Jesus, Jeremiah. You trying to give a guy a heart attack?" I didn't answer, just walked over to the bar and tapped the counter. He hesitated, then poured me a coffee. His hands were shaking. "You hear anything?" I asked, casual. Logan let out a dry, nervous laugh. "Hear anything?" "Yeah, I've been hearing plenty. Like how the goddamn IRS is breathing down my neck. Like how certain accounts aren't where they're supposed to be. Like how my suppliers are suddenly acting like I got the plague." I took a sip, nodded slowly. "Bad luck." He looked at me, really looked this time. "You ever get the feeling someone's got it out for you?" "Can't say I have." He exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. "This isn't just bad luck, man. This is—" He stopped himself, shook his head. "Never mind." I set my cup down, meeting his eyes. "You looking to run?" He tensed. "Who said anything about running?" I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. A man like you doesn't stick around when the walls start closing in. His jaw clenched, a flash of something behind his eyes. Guilt. Or fear. Probably both. "I'm not running." I nodded once slow. "We'll see." As I stood to leave, he grabbed his drink and threw back the last of it like it was going to save him. I stepped out into the cold air, letting the door swing shut behind me. He was cracking. One more push, and he'd break. That evening, Kelly came home late. I was in the garage, fixing up an old chair, sanding down the edges until they were smooth again. She walked in, hovered near the doorway like she wasn't sure if she wanted to step in or walk away. "Logan's panicking," she said after a long moment. "He thinks someone's setting him up." I kept my eyes on the chair, steady. "That's so. He's scared, Jeremiah." She hesitated, then took a step closer. "He thinks it's you." I ran the sandpaper over the wood one last time, then set it down. Finally, I looked at her. "What do you think?" She swallowed. "I think," she trailed off, struggling for the right words. "I think you're different lately." I stood up, brushing the dust off my hands. "You didn't notice before?" She exhaled slow. "You know." I held her gaze. "Yeah." Silence. Heavy weighted. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking down at the floor like she wanted it to swallow her whole. "How long?" "Long enough." Her jaw tightened, and I saw it then. The flicker of something between shame and defiance. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to justify it. Maybe she didn't even know which one she should do first. Instead, she said, "And what now?" I wiped my hands on a rag, tossed it on the workbench. "That's up to you." Her breath hitched, just slightly. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means I'm not going to yell. Not going to beg. Not going to waste my time trying to make sense of it." I stepped forward, closing the space between us just enough. "But I will make sure you understand the cost." Her face paled just slightly. "Jeremiah." "Go to bed, Kelly." She hesitated. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but I could see it. She was afraid of what those answers might be. Finally, she turned and walked back toward the house. I stood there a long time after she was gone, the cold creeping in through the open garage door. The game was almost over. One last move, and it would all come crashing down, just the way I planned. The next morning, Kelly was gone before I even got out of bed. She left without a word, but I knew where she was headed. She was going to Logan, looking for answers, trying to piece together what was happening. It didn't matter. The damage was already done. I took my time getting up, made coffee, sat on the back porch watching the early morning mist settle over the trees. The air was sharp, cold enough to bite if you breathed too deep. I let it wake me up, let it settle something in my chest. The weight that had been sitting there for weeks was lighter now. By noon, I got a call from Harvey. "You're not going to believe this," he said, amusement thick in his voice. "Logan tried to withdraw cash this morning. Whole lot of it. Bank put a hold on his accounts." I smirked. "That right?" "Oh yeah. I got a friend who works at the branch. Said he stormed out of there red-faced, yelling about lawyers and lawsuits. Pretty sure he's sweating through that cheap cologne." "Good." Harvey chuckled. "And your wife? How's she handling things?" "She's thinking. That never ends well." "No, it doesn't." I hung up, grabbed my jacket, and headed into town. Ashford was small, one of those places where everyone knew your business whether you wanted them to or not. And right now, Logan's business was all over town. Word spread fast when a man started losing his grip. Even faster when people stopped trusting him. I parked outside the bar, stepped inside. The usual crowd was there, but the place had a different feel. Quieter. Eyes shifting, conversations dropping when I walked past. Logan was behind the counter, hunched over a pile of receipts, rubbing his forehead like the numbers might start making sense if he just stared at them long enough. When he saw me, his whole body tensed. "You got something to say, Vance?" I walked up to the bar, took my time. "Just checking in." Logan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I picked up a coaster, turned it between my fingers. "Enjoying what?" "This," he snapped, slamming a hand down on the counter. "You think I don't know? Everything's been going to hell ever since." He stopped himself, clenched his jaw. "I don't know what you're playing at, but you better back the hell off." I set the coaster down, met his eyes. "Or what?" His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing. He knew it. I knew it. He grabbed a glass, poured himself a drink with unsteady hands. "You don't get it, do you? You think this makes you the better man." "I don't have to think it." His nostrils flared. "She came to me because you stopped being enough. Because you're a ghost in your own damn house." I smiled, slow. "And yet, here you are. Falling apart." Logan gritted his teeth, downed his drink. I turned and walked out. By the time I got home, Kelly was back. She was in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes darker than I'd seen them in years. "What did you do?" she asked, voice tight. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped the cap, took a slow drink. You'll have to be more specific. She took a step forward, hands curling into fists. You think you're so damn clever, don't you? I met her eyes, calm. No, Kelly. I just think ahead. Her breath hitched, her whole body stiff with frustration. Do you hate me that much? I set the bottle down with a soft clink. Hate you? I shook my head. No. I just don't respect you anymore. That landed. She sucked in a sharp breath, her face pale now. Jeremiah. You wanted something different, I said, my voice steady. You got it. She blinked rapidly, struggling to keep her composure. I never meant for it. I cut her off with a look. Doesn't matter what you meant. She swallowed hard, exhaled through her nose, and straightened her shoulders. So what now? I leaned against the counter, crossed my arms. Now? You deal with the consequences. Her jaw clenched. She turned sharply and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I let her go. There was nothing left to say. Kelly didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. She had nowhere to go, not really, but she'd find a place to land for a while. Maybe she'd go to a hotel, maybe to one of the friends who didn't know better, the ones who would still look at her with sympathy before the truth spread too far. Either way, it didn't change anything. I spent the evening out back, fixing a busted fence post by the shed. The work was simple, mechanical. Kept my hands moving, kept my mind from wandering to places it didn't need to go. By the time I was done, the sky had turned dark, the air biting. I went inside, took a hot shower, and fell asleep without a second thought. The next morning, I got a call from Brianna Anderson. She ran the animal shelter in town, always up to her elbows in work, always the first to step in when someone needed help. Hey, Jeremiah, she said, voice steady. You got a minute? I wiped my hands on a towel. What's going on? She hesitated. Kelly's here. I didn't react, just let the words settle. She came by early, Brianna continued. Said she needed someone to talk to. I sighed. And I listened, she said plainly. She's not asking me to pick sides. She knows how this ends. A pause. She just doesn't know what she's supposed to do next. Not my problem. Brianna must have heard the silence stretch too long because she exhaled, lowering her voice. Jeremiah. She's not playing games. She's lost. I leaned against the counter, rubbing my jaw. She did this to herself. I know, Brianna said. And she knows it too. I stared out the window, watching the trees shift in the wind. What do you want me to do, Brianna? She was quiet for a beat. Just know where she is. That was Brianna, never telling you what to do, just making sure you saw what was in front of you. I didn't answer. Just hung up and set the phone down. I spent the rest of the morning fixing up my truck, checking the engine, replacing a filter that was overdue. If Brianna wanted me to feel something about Kelly showing up at the shelter, she was wasting her time. The way I saw it, Kelly was just looking for a place where she wasn't judged yet. But that wasn't gonna last long. The town was already talking. And once they all knew the full story, there wouldn't be a warm welcome anywhere. By midday, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside. Kelly sat behind the wheel of her car, staring straight ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to keep herself together. I didn't move. Just waited. After a long moment, she shut off the engine and got out. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. When she stopped a few feet away, I could see the way her jaw was set, how hard she was fighting to keep from breaking. I need to talk, she said. I didn't respond. Just crossed my arms and waited. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I screwed up, Jeremiah. I let the words sit there. No reaction. No softening. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted, voice tight. I met her eyes, steady. You don't. She flinched, but she didn't argue. I never meant to hurt you. I let out a slow breath. Doesn't matter. She swallowed hard, shifting her weight. Logan's done. He's leaving town. Good. Her lip twitched, like she wanted to snap at me but didn't have the fight left in her. I don't expect anything from you, she said finally. I don't know what to do. That's not my problem. She nodded, looking down at the gravel beneath her feet. I never thought it would end like this. I tilted my head slightly. How did you think it would end? She didn't answer. After a moment, she straightened her shoulders. I'll pack my things. I didn't stop her. I didn't say another word as she walked inside. I just stood there, watching as the wind picked up dust from the driveway, shifting the dirt, covering the old tire tracks. By the time she left, the house felt lighter. And I didn't look back. Kelly was gone by the next morning. She didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note. just packed up what she could fit in her car and drove off. I heard the tires crunching against the gravel as I sat on the porch with my coffee. Didn't watch her leave. Didn't need to. The door closing behind her was the only sound that mattered. By noon, word had spread. Small town like this, people don't need much to start talking. They saw Logan's bar shut down, saw Kelly's car packed up, and filled in the blanks themselves. I didn't correct them. Didn't add to the noise. I let the town do what it does best, decide for itself who was worth keeping around and who wasn't. I walked into the hardware store later that day, needed a few things for a job I'd put off too long. Dale, the owner, an old guy built like a block of concrete, looked up from his paper. Heard she's gone. I grabbed a box of nails, tossed them onto the counter. Yep. He nodded slowly, chewing on the inside of his cheek. She ain't coming back? Nope. He grunted, bagged my stuff, and didn't ask anything else. That was the thing about men like Dale. They didn't waste words on things that didn't matter. Logan wasn't seen around town after that. His bar shut down for good, locked up with a foreclosure notice slapped on the front. He probably ran, just like I figured he would. A man like him doesn't stay put when he's got no cards left to play. I heard through the grapevine that the IRS was still sniffing around, that his debts were stacking up faster than he could dodge them. He'd burned every bridge he had, and now there was nothing left but the ashes. Kelly sent a text a week later. Short. Just 3 words. I'm sorry, Jeremiah. I deleted it without answering. The house was quieter now. Lighter. I moved through it like it belonged to me again, like it wasn't filled with the ghosts of something already dead. I spent my days working, fixing up places around town, helping out where I was needed. I didn't talk about what happened, and nobody asked. They didn't need to. They saw the way I carried myself, saw that I wasn't broken, wasn't bitter. Just done. One evening, I found myself at Brianna Anderson's shelter, fixing up a busted fence post that had been leaning too far for too long. She brought me a beer, leaned against the gate while I worked. Guess you're finally free, huh? She said, watching me with that steady gaze of hers. I finished hammering the last nail, dusted off my hands. Guess so. She tilted her head slightly. What are you gonna do now? I looked out past the yard, past the shelter, past the road that stretched out toward the horizon. I could do anything, go anywhere. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to leave. Didn't feel the weight of something pressing on my back, pushing me toward something else. I took a slow drink of my beer, let the air settle between us. Then I smirked, just a little. Think I'll stick around. Brianna nodded, like she'd expected that answer. She clinked her bottle against mine and took a sip. The sun dipped lower, the sky turning gold, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should.